Look at the songbooks if you would, turn to 577. 577. There's a royal banner given for display to the soldiers of the King. As an ensign fair we lift it up today, while as ransomed ones we sing. Marching on, for Christ count everything but lost. For the King of Kings, toil and sing, neath the banner of the cross. Over land and sea, wherever man may dwell, make the glorious tidings known. Of the crimson banner now the story tell, while the Lord shall claim his own. Marching on, for Christ count everything but lost. For the King of Kings, toil and sing, neath the banner of the cross. When the great commander from the vaulted sky sounds the resurrection day, and before our King the fainted foe shall die, as the saints shall march away. Marching on, for Christ count everything but lost. For the King of Kings, toil and sing, neath the banner of the cross. Psalm before the opening prayer will be 557. There is a mountain filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that blood lose all their guilty stains, lose all their guilty stains, lose all their guilty stains. And sinners plunged beneath that blood lose all their guilty stains. Dear dying Lamb, thy precious blood shall never lose its power. Till all the ransomed church of God be saved to sin no more. Be saved to sin no more. Be saved to sin no more. Till all the ransomed church of God be saved to sin no more. Ever since by faith I saw the stream, thy flowing wounds supply. Redeeming love has been my theme, and shall be till I die, and shall be till I die, and shall be till I die. Redeeming love has been my theme, and shall be till I die. Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day that we've had. Pray that thus far we've used it wisely and according to your will. Pray, Father, this day that we brought no shame to your name, but only glory. As we once again assemble to worship you, we pray this things will be done in our hearts according to your will. Father, forgive us of our sins as we turn from them. We know that we have nothing to boast about save the cross of Christ. Be with us through this hour and all the days of our lives. These things we ask in Jesus' name. 6:15, 6:15. First, second, and third. We have heard the joyful sound. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Bear the news to every land. Climb the steeps and cross the waves. Onward is the Lord's command. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Wafted on the rolling tide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. He'll do sinners far and wide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing ye islands of the seas. Echo back ye ocean caves. Earth shall keep her jubilee. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Give the winds a mighty voice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Let the nations now rejoice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Shout salvation full and free. Highest hills and deepest caves. This our song of victory. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. You want to mark the invitation song? That will be 587. Invitation will be 587. Song before the scripture reading will be 617. 617. After this song, Brother Charlie brings scripture reading. 617. Though the way we journey may be often drear, we shall see the King someday. On that blessed morning, clouds will disappear. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when each shall call his own. We shall see the King someday. After pain and anguish, after toil and care, we shall see the King someday. Through the endless ages, joy and blessing share. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when he shall call his own. We shall see the King someday. There with all the loved ones who have gone before. We shall see the King someday. Sorrow past forever on that peaceful shore. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when he shall call his own. We shall see the King someday.
Scripture reading this evening will come from 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 29 through 31. 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 29 through 31. And in the 30th and 8th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezabel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And now Patrick will bring the lesson.
Thank you for the scripture reading. Tonight we're going to look at the life of Jezebel. Sometimes we have to look at bad examples of how we're not supposed to act. And this one, in this case, is Jezebel. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that we do have the videos on Facebook for Bible class and for worship service. This morning's Bible class, the video failed. I think we know why it failed, but it did not get, or is not going to get posted. So if you don't have Facebook, we do put that on YouTube, and if you need help finding that on your cell phone, or if you want it shared to your internet so you can watch it on the computer, just ask me after services and I can help you with that. So you can go back and watch those. That's one reason I try to pass out the outlines, is so that we can watch those and then go back with the outlines and try to go back and review as well. But we have those so that we can review. So let's take a look at this, and let's review this scripture reading one more time. 1 Kings 16, beginning in verse 29. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, and remember, Judah and Israel were split here. So Asa was the king of Judah. Began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. It came to pass, as if it had been a light thing, for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezabel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So, as if he hadn't done enough evil, he takes to wife Jezebel. And it's as if we already know a lot about Jezebel, but this is the first time that we see anything about Jezebel. And Jezebel and Ahab are perhaps two of the most infamous people that are mentioned in the Old Testament. And it's because of the evil deeds that we're going to look at here this evening. But again, this is the first time that we see anything about Jezebel in the Bible, and it's not good. It's not good at all. If you're first introduced to somebody, you want your introduction to be a good thing. You don't want it to be a bad thing. Introduction should be a good thing, but it's not good. And the rest of what we see about Jezebel is never a good thing. All that we hear about her is bad. Jezebel was the daughter of the king of the Sidonians. And, you know, growing up, everything I heard about Jezebel, I always thought her name meant something probably evil. And I didn't get the actual Hebrew word here, but her name actually means chase. It means chase. I thought it was going to be something bad, but her name means chase. And, you know, I looked up some stats, and, you know, we often, when we hear sermons about the name Jezebel, how many times do we hear about girls, at least in the United States, being named Jezebel? Not too often, right? Well, I found a website, and from 1910 to 1903, this particular website kept track of all the names or all the times that a girl was named Jezebel. And from 1910 to 1993, 0 times was a girl named Jezebel. It wasn't until 1994 to 2020 that girls started to be called Jezebel in the United States. And it was about 10 to 21 girls per year that were called Jezebel. 21 was the maximum in a year. And most of these places, I don't know that you'll be surprised by this, but California and Texas were the places that girls were called Jezebel. There was a few in Florida and New York. The lowest, besides 0 in these few years, was 5 in a year. But I thought that was interesting. We don't have a lot of girls in the United States named Jezebel. And probably because of all the evil that we hear about Jezebel. So, a little bit further, Sidon was on the northeast coast of the Mediterranean. They were a people that were known for their idolatrous practices. And of course, Jezebel brought it with her to Israel when she married Ahab. These practices would create many problems for the nation in the coming 22 years that Ahab would reign as king over Israel. So let's take a look at the life of Jezebel. And first, let's look at her marriage. The marriage here of Jezebel and Ahab. As we noted, this marriage is the first time that we have this introduction of Jezebel in the Bible. Jezebel brought her religion to the marriage. She was a worshiper of the idol Baal, as we see here in 1 Kings 16. And she brought that with her. Ahab was inclined to her wishes in this regard, and he promoted the religion in Israel. Thank you, Brother Luke, for pointing out my typo there for me. Not a promoter. He was a promoter if he promoted it, but the way I typed that sentence was a typo. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 7, if you would. And we'll come back to 1 Kings. But Deuteronomy chapter 7, God warns his people about this problem of marrying and bringing in false religions. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 and 4 says this, "Neither shalt thou make marriages with them, thy daughters," this is the strangers around about them, "thy daughters thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son, for they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods, so will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly." Solomon had this problem. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 11 and see what was said there about Solomon. Most of us know that he took in many wives and had many concubines. But 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, he even takes in of the same people that Jezebel was from. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1 says, "But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, of the nations which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love." In all the wisdom that Solomon had, he chose to disobey God in this thing. He took in strange wives, and God warned them that they would turn their hearts away, and it came true. Together, Ahab and Jezebel made the lives very difficult for those who wished to follow God, to follow after Jehovah. And we see that true today. those who wish to follow after God, our lives can be made very difficult in this country. Ahab's choice of Jezebel was consequential for not only his, but many other lives in Israel for those, again, who followed after Jehovah. So what can we learn from Jezebel's marriage? Well, as far as for the young ones here in the audience that haven't married yet, and for those of us who are grandparents and have grandchildren who haven't married, we need to learn that the people we decide to marry are going to bring their religion to the marriage. It's important that we decide to marry someone who is going to be faithful to God. We must first seek God's kingdom in our lives. Put God first in everything that we do. Matthew 6, verse 33. And this would be in regard to the person that we choose to marry as well. The person we marry is going to be in a position of great influence over our lives. They are going to have input on matters of money, our schedule, our children, our activities, and our worship. This is the greatest place of influence that we probably have on another person's life. That influence can be either for good or for bad, depending upon the person we choose to marry. It would do us well to marry a faithful Christian. You know, this is something that we don't put on top priority anymore in this country. We don't put it in our thoughts. We don't teach it to our children. And we see that by the way our nation is going. 1 Kings 21, verse 25 summarizes the situation by saying, "But there was none like unto Ahab, who did sell himself to do that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah, whom Jezebel, his wife, stirred up." It doesn't matter if it's men, our wives, or women, our husbands. We need to make sure we choose a faithful Christian for our spouse. Second, Jezebel's persecution of the prophets. Let's take a look at this part of her life. And as we see today, it was not Jezebel that was the one being persecuted, but the one doing the persecution. We've talked about this a lot in Bible class, but as we look at today, the ones who are doing evil think they're the ones being persecuted. But they're the ones actually doing the persecuting. Let's turn and look at 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. We'll back up here to verse 1 of 1 Kings 18. "And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. For it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water." Jezebel cut off the prophets. The Hebrew word here is karaf. In English we can spell this as K-A-R-A-T-H. Karaf means to cut down, to kill, to destroy. She wanted to systematically get rid of God's prophets to the point that they had to go into hiding to escape her persecution. She also sought the life of Elijah as well in 1 Kings 19, verses 1 and 2. We won't go there and read that one. She gave instead refuge to the priests and priestesses of Baal. 800 in total. Let's look at verse 19 of 1 Kings 18. "Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel," this is Elijah, "unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. He wanted them gathered in one place. This is where Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, and eventually it leads to their defeat and death because they can't win Elijah's challenge because he proves them to be false prophets to a false god, and he has them slaughtered. Jesus' words are what come to mind in Matthew 5:11 and 12 when he says, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you." God's prophets were persecuted in the Old Testament. We saw God's people persecuted in the New Testament when we read and study there. And if we are following God's will today, we are still going to be persecuted today. We learn that wherever there are competing religious ideologies, that God's people will more often than not be strongly persecuted. Third, let's look at Jezebel's covetousness. Jezebel played a leading role, if not the leading role, in the acquisition of Naboth's vineyard. 1 Kings 21. Here, we might remember that Naboth wouldn't sell to Ahab because it was his inheritance, this garden, the vineyard. That didn't stop Jezebel. She sent letters to the leaders of the city, urging them to frame Naboth for blasphemy and have him stoned. And it worked. They had him killed. She informed Ahab that Naboth was dead and urged him to take over the vineyard. She coveted to the point of murder. And not just anything, but a specific item, this vineyard. Covetousness can be a terrible sin. In Exodus 20 and verse 17, we see that covetousness is listed with the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not covet. Covetousness was listed as one of the reasons to withdraw fellowship by Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 10. But Paul also tells us that it's a form of idolatry in Colossians 3 and verse 5. We've mentioned in lessons past that idol worship is not something that is gone. We still have idol worship today. And we should not be coveting other people's possessions. When we allow the desire of this world's possessions to take control over our lives, then there's no end to the evil that we will be willing to do. And it results in covetousness. Hebrews 13 and verse 5 says, "Let your conversation, or manner of life, your lifestyle, the way you live, be without covetousness." Final thing in Jezebel's life that we'll look at this evening is the prophecy of her death. It was promised. Jezebel had done enough wickedness to God's people in her life that God prophesied that she was going to die a terrible death. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 21, if you would. We'll back up to verse 21. It says, "Behold, I will bring evil upon thee, and will take away thy posterity, and will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel, and will make thine house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah, for the provocation wherewith thou hast provoked me to anger, and made Israel to sin. And Jezebel also spake the Lord, saying, The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." This prophecy was repeated in 2 Kings 9, 1 through 10, when Jehu was anointed king over Israel. Jehu had began carrying out God's orders and killing Ahab's children, as Elijah had prophesied would be done. When Jehu finally came to Jezebel's house, her own servants threw her out the window, and he drove over her with a chariot. You can see this in 2 Kings 9:33. He went to eat, and he came back to bury her body, but the dogs had already taken over and fed on her corpse, and all that was left was her skull, hands and feet. And this was the promised death that God had prophesied of her. It's a terrible way to go, but she was an evil person. God takes seriously the persecution of his own people. Matthew 18 talks about God's displeasure toward those who would cause his people to stumble. So much so that Jesus says it's better that a millstone be wrapped around someone's neck and they be cast into the sea instead of causing one of God's people to stumble. In the life of Jezebel, we see this Old Testament example of one way that God does to people, or at least did then. Sin is offensive to God, and God will reward such according to their works. Jezebel was a wicked woman who did many wicked things, and she reaped what she sowed. Let's go to Galatians chapter 6 before we close this up. God gives us this example in Galatians chapter 6. Beginning verse 7, Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And then he tells us what we should do as Christians. Verse 9, And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we think not, or if we don't give up in doing good. Verse 10, As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. In this lesson on Jezebel, we find the marriage of Jezebel and Ahab. We have the example of bringing in false religions if we don't marry the right person. Jezebel's persecution of the prophets. Example of how we should treat other people, especially God's people. Jezebel's covetousness and the evilness thereof. The promised death of Jezebel. Sadly, the Bible has absolutely nothing good to say about Jezebel. Again, this may be a good reason why people or women today are not named Jezebel. Let's make sure that we live our lives in a way that we avoid the decisions that she chose in her life. This evening, if you need to put Christ on in baptism, or if you need the prayers of the church, if you need to repent of a public sin, whatever your need may be, the Lord's invitation is available. Let's together we stand in that.
'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, just to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust his cleansing blood, just in simple faith to plunge me neath the healing cleansing blood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. I'm so glad I learned to trust thee, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I proved him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Let's turn to 591. 591. If anyone was hindered from taking the Lord's Supper this morning, it's been left prepared to come forward while we sing the first verse of 591. Is midnight and on olive's brow, the star is dim that lately shone. 'Tis midnight in the garden now, the suffering Savior prays alone. Closing song is 589. One page back. That's this song by Luther. To your minds in prayer. 589. To Christ be loyal and be true, his banner be unfurled, and borne aloft till it secured the conquest of the world. To Christ the Lord be true, for he will go with you, and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true. He needs brave volunteers to stand against the powers of sin, who knock our crowns or fears. To Christ the Lord be true, for he will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true. In noble service prove your faith and your fidelity, the fervor of your love. To Christ the Lord be true, for he will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true.
Let's pray. Father,